My in-laws tried declaring me unfit to control my spouse's fortune. I exposed their loan shark debt. What started as a campaign to paint me as mentally unstable and financially irresponsible ended with revelations that destroyed their reputation and exposed the dangerous criminal connections they'd been hiding for years. I'm Alexandra Torres, 34 years old, and I married Cameron Whitmore in 2019. Cameron came from old money. The Whitmore family had built their fortune in shipping and real estate over 4 generations. Cameron's trust fund was worth approximately $28 million, generating around $1.2 million annually in passive income. We lived comfortably but not ostentatiously in Seattle, where I worked as a trauma surgeon and Cameron ran a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. Cameron's parents, Richard and Patricia Whitmore, had always treated me with barely concealed disdain. I wasn't from their social circle. My parents were immigrants who ran a small restaurant. I'd worked my way through medical school with scholarships and loans. In Patricia's eyes, I was obviously a gold digger who'd trapped her child into marriage. The problems escalated dramatically in March 2023 when Cameron was in a serious car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and Cameron's car was T-boned at high speed. Cameron survived but suffered a traumatic brain injury that required 2 surgeries and months of rehabilitation. During Cameron's recovery, I took family medical leave from the hospital to provide full-time care. Cameron's cognitive functions were affected, memory issues, difficulty with complex decisions, emotional regulation problems. The neurologist was optimistic about recovery but said it would take at least a year, possibly longer. I managed everything during this period: medical decisions, household finances, Cameron's trust fund distributions. Cameron had given me power of attorney years earlier, a routine legal document that became essential during the recovery period. 2 months into Cameron's recovery, Richard and Patricia showed up at our house unannounced. Patricia's expression was cold as she pushed past me into the living room. "We need to discuss Cameron's care," Richard announced without preamble. "We're concerned about the current arrangements." "What concerns?" I asked, immediately defensive. Patricia produced a folder. "We've been reviewing the trust fund statements. There have been some unusual expenditures." I knew exactly what she was referring to. "You mean the $85,000 I withdrew for Cameron's rehabilitation?" "That seems excessive for rehabilitation," Richard said. "Cameron needs intensive therapy, physical, occupational, cognitive, and speech. Insurance doesn't cover everything. I'm paying for the best care possible." "Or you're using this opportunity to drain the trust fund," Patricia said flatly. I felt my face flush with anger. "How dare you suggest that? Everything I've spent has been for Cameron's benefit." "We're also concerned about your capacity to make appropriate medical decisions," Richard continued. "Cameron's neurologist mentioned you've been quite aggressive about the treatment plan, sometimes against medical advice." "That's not true. I've been advocating for Cameron's best interests." Patricia's smile was cruel. "Alexandra, we think it's time we took over Cameron's care. You're clearly overwhelmed and not making sound decisions. We're petitioning for guardianship." My stomach dropped. "Guardianship? Cameron is my spouse. I have power of attorney, which can be challenged when the person holding it is demonstrably unfit," Richard said. "We've consulted with attorneys. Given Cameron's condition and your questionable decision-making, we have grounds." They left shortly after and I immediately called our attorney, Marcus Chen. He listened to my account with growing concern. "They're going to argue you're financially exploiting Cameron and making poor medical decisions," Marcus explained. "In guardianship hearings, they'll present evidence of your supposed unfitness, and if the judge agrees, they'll be appointed as Cameron's guardians." "What does that mean for me?" "You'd lose all decision-making authority. They'd control Cameron's medical care, finances, and even where Cameron lives. They could prevent you from seeing your own spouse if they deemed it not in Cameron's best interest." The guardianship petition was filed 2 weeks later. The allegations were devastating. Questionable financial withdrawals suggesting exploitation. Aggressive medical decision-making against doctor recommendations. Isolating Cameron from family. Emotional instability affecting judgment. History of erratic behavior. Completely fabricated. They'd attached witness statements from people I'd never met, claiming I'd displayed concerning behavior at various times. A financial expert they'd hired claimed the trust fund withdrawals showed a pattern of exploitation. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I had to defend myself against these lies while continuing to care for Cameron, who was still struggling with cognitive recovery. I hired a private investigator named Sarah Mitchell to dig into Richard and Patricia's background. If they were willing to fabricate evidence against me, what else might they be hiding? "Focus on their finances," I told Sarah. "They live in a mansion, drive luxury cars, and take expensive vacations, but Richard retired 5 years ago. Where's the money coming from?" Sarah worked fast. Within 2 weeks, she'd uncovered troubling patterns. Richard and Patricia's spending far exceeded their documented income. They'd taken out multiple mortgages on properties they supposedly owned free and clear. Credit card debt was approaching $400,000 across various accounts. But the real discovery came when Sarah followed Richard to a meeting at an upscale restaurant. He met with a man named Viktor Kozlov, who Sarah recognized from her previous work in financial crimes. Viktor Kozlov is a high-end loan shark, Sarah explained, showing me surveillance photos. He lends to wealthy people who've gotten in over their heads but don't want traditional lenders looking at their finances. Interest rates are astronomical and he has connections to organized crime. How much do they owe him? I'm still working on that, but based on what I'm seeing, it's substantial. Probably over $2 million. The picture became clear. Richard and Patricia had been living beyond their means for years, borrowing from increasingly dangerous sources. Now they were facing repayment demands they couldn't meet. Cameron's trust fund represented a solution, if they could get control of it. I brought this information to Marcus. He reviewed Sarah's findings carefully. This changes everything, Marcus said. They're not trying to protect Cameron, they're trying to access the trust fund to pay off loan sharks. That's not just financial desperation, it's potential criminal activity. We prepared our defense for the guardianship hearing. But I also did something more aggressive. I filed a police report about Richard and Patricia's dealings with Kozlov, suggesting possible elder abuse and exploitation of a vulnerable person. Detective Lisa Brennan from the Financial Crimes Unit took my statement. I showed her Sarah's evidence. The meetings with Kozlov, the debt pattern, the timing of the guardianship petition right after Cameron's accident. What you're describing could be attempted fraud, Detective Brennan said. If they're planning to use guardianship to access your spouse's money to pay criminal debts, that's serious. I'll open an investigation. The guardianship hearing arrived in May 2023. Richard and Patricia showed up with their expensive attorney, Gregory Morrison. They looked confident, even smug. The hearing started with their presentation. Morrison called a financial witness who testified about the suspicious trust fund withdrawals. He called a family friend, who claimed to have witnessed me being erratic and aggressive toward Cameron. Cameron's neurologist, Dr. Raymond Foster, was called next. Morrison tried to get him to say I'd been difficult or went against medical advice. Dr. Foster, has Mrs. Torres been cooperative with Cameron's treatment plan? Extremely cooperative, Dr. Foster replied. She's been an exemplary caregiver. But didn't you mention she was aggressive about the treatment approach? I said she was an aggressive advocate for Cameron's recovery. That's different from being difficult. She asked informed questions, researched treatment options, and ensured Cameron received the best possible care. That's exactly what I want to see in a family member. Morrison's expression tightened. He dismissed Dr. Foster and called Patricia to testify. Patricia painted a picture of me as a controlling, financially motivated spouse who'd isolated Cameron from family. She claimed I'd prevented them from visiting, refused to share medical information, and made unilateral decisions about Cameron's care. Then it was our turn. Marcus called me to testify first. I explained every financial withdrawal with documentation, receipts from rehabilitation facilities, medical equipment purchases, therapy session records. Everything had been for Cameron's benefit. Marcus then called Sarah Mitchell as a witness. Morrison objected immediately. Your Honor, this witness is a private investigator hired by the respondent. Her testimony is biased. She's testifying about her factual findings, Marcus countered. The court can evaluate credibility. The judge allowed Sarah to testify. She presented her evidence methodically. The debt pattern, the meetings with Viktor Kozlov, the timeline showing the guardianship petition filed right after Cameron's accident made them vulnerable. In my professional opinion, Sarah concluded, the petitioners are attempting to gain control of Cameron Whitmore's trust fund not for Cameron's benefit, but to address their own substantial debts to a known criminal lender. The courtroom was silent. Richard and Patricia's faces had gone pale. Marcus then called Detective Brennan, who testified about the ongoing criminal investigation into Richard and Patricia's finances. We're investigating whether the guardianship petition represents attempted fraud, Detective Brennan stated. Evidence suggests the petitioners may be planning to misappropriate funds to pay debts to criminal entities. The judge looked at Richard and Patricia with barely concealed disgust. Mr. Morrison, does your client wish to withdraw the petition? Morrison consulted frantically with Richard and Patricia. After several minutes, Morrison stood. Your Honor, in light of the testimony heard today, my clients wish to withdraw their guardianship petition. Motion granted, the judge said coldly. And I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore from any unsupervised contact with Cameron Whitmore until the criminal investigation is concluded. Richard and Patricia fled the courtroom. I sat there shaking with relief and residual anger. But the story didn't end there. Detective Brennan's investigation uncovered even more disturbing details. Richard had been embezzling from his former company's pension fund before retirement, which explained his sudden retirement 5 years earlier. Patricia had been running various investment scams among their wealthy social circle. They'd accumulated over $2.8 million in debt to Viktor Kozlov, with interest compounding at 15% monthly. Kozlov had begun threatening them in February 2023, right before Cameron's accident. Cameron's accident had been, in their minds, a fortunate opportunity. If they could gain guardianship and access to the trust fund, they could pay off Kozlov and solve their financial crisis. The criminal investigation led to charges against Richard and Patricia: attempted fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Their trial was scheduled for October 2023. Meanwhile, Cameron's recovery continued. By August 2023, Cameron had regained most cognitive functions and was horrified to learn what had happened during the recovery period. "My own parents tried to steal my money while I was recovering from a brain injury," Cameron said, still processing it all. "They saw an opportunity and took it. But they underestimated how well I'd protect you." Cameron looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone." "I wasn't alone. We had good people helping us: Marcus, Sarah, Dr. Foster. And the truth came out. What happens to my parents now? That's up to the courts." But Cameron, they made their choices. They chose money and criminal connections over their own child's well-being. Richard and Patricia's trial was a media sensation. The story of wealthy parents trying to exploit their brain-injured child to pay off loan sharks captured public attention. Their social circle turned on them immediately. Nobody wanted association with people facing criminal charges. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: financial records showing the debt accumulation, recorded meetings with Kozlov, obtained through wiretaps, expert testimony about the guardianship scheme. Richard and Patricia's defense claimed they'd genuinely been concerned about Cameron's welfare and the guardianship petition was legitimate. But the evidence destroyed that narrative. The jury found them guilty on multiple counts. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Patricia received 6 years. They were also ordered to pay restitution and fines, though their bankruptcy made collection unlikely. Viktor Kozlov was arrested separately on racketeering and illegal lending charges. His criminal network was dismantled, revealing that Richard and Patricia had been far from his only victims. The aftermath was complex. Cameron had to grieve the parents we'd thought they were while accepting the reality of who they actually were. We attended therapy together, working through the trauma of the guardianship battle and Cameron's ongoing recovery. Cameron's extended family reached out with apologies. Many had known Richard and Patricia were having financial troubles but hadn't realized the extent. Some admitted they'd been suspicious when the guardianship petition was filed but hadn't wanted to get involved. "That's the problem," Cameron said during one family gathering. "Everyone suspected something was wrong but nobody wanted to confront it. And that silence almost let them destroy my marriage and steal my future." By the end of 2023, Cameron had made a near-complete recovery. The neurologist was amazed by the progress, attributing it partially to the high-quality care I'd insisted on during those crucial early months, the same care Richard and Patricia had tried to paint as financial exploitation. Cameron returned to running the nonprofit, though with some accommodations for remaining memory challenges. We hired an assistant to help with detailed organizational work, and Cameron focused on strategic vision and relationship building. I returned to work at the hospital, though the experience had changed me. I'd seen how quickly family members could turn predatory when money was involved, how vulnerable people could become during medical crises. I started volunteering with an organization that provides legal support to people whose family members attempt inappropriate guardianships. Cameron and I both became advocates for guardianship reform, pushing for better protections against financially motivated petitions. The trust fund, which had been at the center of everything, remained under Cameron's control. We restructured it with additional protections: multiple trustees required for large withdrawals, regular audits, and clear documentation requirements. We also set up a separate foundation funded by the trust, focused on supporting people recovering from traumatic brain injuries and protecting vulnerable individuals from financial exploitation. Richard and Patricia are currently serving their sentences at separate federal facilities. Cameron writes to them occasionally but hasn't visited. The relationship may never recover, and Cameron has accepted that. "I mourn who I thought they were," Cameron told me recently. "But I can't have a relationship with who they actually are, people who would exploit me at my most vulnerable." Looking back, the guardianship battle was terrifying while it was happening. Being accused of financial exploitation and unfitness while caring for my spouse during a medical crisis felt like being gaslit on a massive scale. But I learned important lessons. Document everything, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and don't be afraid to investigate people who are investigating you. Richard and Patricia's biggest mistake was assuming I'd be an easy target. They thought they could paint me as an unfit gold digger and walk away with control of millions. They didn't anticipate that I'd fight back, that I'd hire investigators, that I'd uncover their criminal connections. Their second biggest mistake was underestimating how much I loved Cameron. I wasn't managing the trust fund for financial gain, I was protecting my spouse. Every decision I made was about Cameron's recovery and well-being, which made defending myself easier because the truth was on my side. Today Cameron and I are stronger than ever. We've been through something that would destroy many marriages, but it actually reinforced what we knew. We're a team and we protect each other against anyone who tries to hurt us. The fortune that Richard and Patricia tried to steal is now being used for good, supporting nonprofits, helping brain injury survivors, and building affordable housing. Cameron's parents wanted to use it to pay off loan sharks. We chose a different path. Thanks for following this difficult journey about family betrayal, criminal conspiracy, and protecting the people we love from those who would exploit them. Sometimes the people who seem respectable and wealthy are hiding the darkest secrets. Until we meet again, folks. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your thoughts.